Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this is my hands-on first looks review of the Canon EOS R7, a high-end cropped frame mirrorless camera with a 32 megapixel APS-C sensor, 4K 60p video and built-in stabilization. Announced in May 2022 at a body price of $1499 or £1349, Canon's calling it their ultimate APS-C camera, and while not officially a successor to the 7D Mark II DSLR, the single-digit model number leaves no doubt where it's positioned. This is a robust and fast camera aimed at sports and wildlife photography, and one that Canon also hopes will convert the 7D Mark II faithful to the world of mirrorless. Like other APS-C systems, the smaller sensor is the key, not only cheaper to manufacture, but effectively magnifying the view from all lenses by 1.6 times, while still maintaining the full image resolution. This makes them perfect for distant wildlife. The R7 packs all of its 32 megapixels into the smaller APS-C area versus, say, the EOS R5, which may start with a higher 45 megapixel resolution, but falls to around 15 when cropped to the same degree. The smaller sensors also allow more compact bodies and lenses to be developed. Canon loaned me a pre-production R7 for this initial review, where I'll show you around the body, controls and features. I'll also briefly talk about the photo and video quality, but I'm leaving my full performance report for a final production model, which I'll link to here when it's ready. Make sure you subscribe so you know when it's good to go. The EOS R7 on the right was launched alongside the lower end and more affordable R10 on the left, and I also have a review of that model if you're interested. The R10 body cost $979 or £899. They jointly launched the RFS system, a new series of mirrorless cameras and lenses designed for smaller crop frame APS-C sensors. Now, it's not compatible with Canon's earlier EFM system, but by employing the same mount as full-frame RF bodies, you can fit any RF lens without an adapter, but with their field of view reducing by 1.6 times. Or indeed vice versa, with RFS lenses also working on full-frame EOS R bodies, albeit with the bodies then operating in a 1.6 times cropped mode. This is a key benefit over Canon's earlier EFS lenses, which were designed for APS-C bodies but couldn't actually mount on full-frame DSLRs. Speaking of DSLR lenses, you can of course adapt to any EF or EFS lens, and anything you mount on the R7 will have its field of view reduced by 1.6 times. This also opens the possibility of speed booster adapters for full-frame EF lenses, but sadly there's no official word on compatibility with Canon's own EF to EOS R 0.71 times accessory launched with the C70. That was a cinema camera which also has an APS-C sensor and an RF mount, and that accessory would be really neat for the R7. This fully backward and forwards compatibility between cropped and full-frame gear is something EFM could never offer, and while Canon again prefers not to burn bridges, I'd say RFS almost certainly marks the end of EOS M development, not that there's been that much in recent times. That said, with the entry-level R10 body alone costing $979 or £899, older EOS M bodies like the M50 and M200 will remain on sale as a more affordable option for those getting into mirrorless on a tighter budget. Canon's launched the RFS system with two new zoom lenses, the RFS 18-45mm f4.5 to 6.3, a compact collapsing model that becomes the standard kit zoom for the R10, and the RFS 18-150 f3.5 to 6.3, a super zoom that's optionally bundled with either the R10 and R7. I've made short videos about both of these lenses if you'd like to find out more. Now, there's no RFS roadmap as yet, but I sincerely hope Canon's planning some higher end aspirational lenses alongside the usual low to mid end models which previously dominated the EFS and EFM catalogues. Canon, we're watching you carefully. In your hands, the R7 feels as solid and robust as the best Canon mirrorless cameras, and is also sealed against dust and moisture. Weighing 610 grams with battery, it can't help but lack the reassuring heft of the earlier 7D Mark II, which weighs around 50% more, but only time will tell if it's any less tough as a result. The EOS R7 does employ magnesium alloy in its construction, but the mirrorless design means it's not only lighter than the 7D2, but at 130 by 90 by 92mm, it's smaller all round too, and that's good news for wildlife photographers in the field. The grip is also comfortable and tall enough to accommodate all my fingers, while the controls fell naturally under my right finger and thumb during operation. There's a soft touch shutter release button, finger and thumb wheels, a power switch that can start the camera into stills or video, and while the main mode dial isn't lockable, it's sufficiently stiff not to be turned by mistake. Round the back, you'll notice the joystick is now surrounded by a new wheel control, allowing you to very quickly move your thumb between them. At first I wasn't convinced by the arrangement, as while the wheel did prove easy to turn quickly or slowly, I felt it might make the joystick less pleasant to push around, but Canon's got the pressure and feedback right on both controls, and before long I found the approach quite usable. That said, 7D2 owners will undoubtedly miss their traditional big Canon thumb wheel. Like the 7D2, the fastest mechanical shutter remains 0.008 of a second, but unlike the aging DSLR, there's also a silent electronic shutter mode which can fire at up to 0.016 of a second. Oh, and bonus points to Canon for a new AF-MF switch by the lens mount, which is particularly handy when using the more affordable RF lenses that lack a switch of their own and previously forced you to delve into the menus. I fed that back to them, so thanks for listening. Like most new Canon bodies, the R7 is equipped with a fully articulated touchscreen which can flip and twist to almost any angle, including forward to face you or back on itself for protection. It uses a 2.95-inch panel with 1.62 million dots. In contrast, the 7D2 screen wasn't only just fixed in position, but it wasn't touch sensitive either. Meanwhile, the viewfinder employs a 2.36 million dot OLED with a generous 1.15 times magnification and the choice of 60 or 120Hz refresh rates. The view is certainly large and smooth, but I'm a little surprised Canon opted for a fairly modest resolution panel for their ultimate APS-C camera. I realise that high resolution viewfinder panels are pricier and more power hungry, but surely a 3 or even a 5 million dot panel would have been more appropriate for this kind of model. That said, it didn't hold me back when shooting, so let's move on. All the ports are behind 4 flaps on the left side of the body. There's micro HDMI and USB-C, the latter supporting charging in camera with a power delivery source, and I checked that it works with my Samsung phone and Apple MacBook chargers. Remember that the 7D2 didn't actually have USB charging. There's a 3.5mm microphone input, a remote jack, and a 3.5mm headphone jack too, but the R7 does lack the PC sync port of the 7D Mark II. Meanwhile, the hot shoe, inherited from the EOS R3 and R5C, supports additional accessories including microphones with direct audio connections, but unlike the cheaper R10, there's no pop-up flash. Long-term Canon fans just waiting for a gotcha, not least 7D2 owners, will be relieved to discover not one but 2 SD card slots behind a door on the grip side, and they both exploit UHS-2 speeds. You can set them to overflow for stills, or backup for stills or video, or have them record stills to one and video to the other. The EOS 7R is powered by a familiar battery too, the LP-E6NH, which is quoted as delivering up to 770 shots with the screen under SEPA conditions, although you'll get less with the viewfinder. 7D2 owners can also reuse their LP-E6N batteries, although these ones do lack the ability to be USB charged, so you'll have to continue to top them up using an external AC charger. At the time I made this review, I wasn't aware of a battery grip accessory for the R7. Which at last brings me to the sensor. APS-C sized, stabilised within the body, and sporting 32.5 megapixels. Now this is almost certainly based on the same sensor introduced on the M6 II and 90D, with much the same resolving power as a result, but Canon claims to have improved the micro lenses and circuitry which, coupled with the new Digic X processor, may provide faster speed and lower noise. I'll test all of that in part 2 of my review. Also notice how the shutter closes to protect the sensor from dust when the R7's powered down, like the EOS R. In contrast, the cheaper R10 follows the RP strategy of leaving it exposed, since the target buyers may not appreciate how fragile those shutter curtains are. In terms of photo quality, you can record 32 megapixel images with 6960 by 4640 pixels in either JPEG, HIF or 14-bit RAW formats. Compressed RAW and low-resolution JPEG or HIF formats are also available. The images are a big step up in potential resolution over the 20 megapixel 7D Mark II, and that of course provides even more latitude for cropping. As a camera aimed to satisfy sports and wildlife enthusiasts, the R7 doesn't skimp on speed either, capturing up to 224 JPEG or 51 RAW files at 15 frames per second using the fully mechanical shutter, and that's a comfortable step up from the 10 frames per second of the 7D Mark II. And here's how that sounds. Alternatively, you can switch to a fully electronic shutter and enjoy up to 126 JPEGs or 42 RAWs at 30 frames per second and at the full 32 megapixel resolution, and of course with the benefit of potentially silent shooting. You can, however, have a sound effect if you like, and here's how that sounds. The R7 also has an electronic RAW burst option at 30 frames per second, with the option to enable a half-second pre-shot buffer so you don't miss the moment, say a bird takes flight. As a modern mirrorless camera, the dual-pixel CMOS AF2 is a big upgrade over the 7D Mark II, not just sporting coverage across the entire frame, but also supporting human, animal or vehicle detection. The R7 also includes multiple exposures and focus bracketing, as well as interval and bulb timers. There's even a built-in auto-stitching panorama mode, the first time on an EOS camera. Once again, I'm waiting for a final production model before evaluating the quality and performance, but for now, here's a shot I took with a pre-production R7, an RFS 18-150mm zoom, which has got plenty of detail in it. Moving on to video, the R7 will film uncropped 1080 or 4K at 24-60p. There's also a cropped 4K mode for even tighter views at 50-60p, and a 4K fine mode at 24-30p, which oversamples from 7K's worth of data for a potentially crisper result. Here's a 1080 25p clip I filmed with the RFS 18-150 using a pre-production R7, so while again I'm leaving my analysis to a final model, I thought I'd briefly show you the other modes. So here's the R7 in normal 4K at 25p using IPB compression at 120 megabits per second, followed by 4K at 50p, which uses 230 megabits per second, and finally 4K fine back at 25p and again at 120 megabits per second. I'll make detailed comparisons when I have a final production model. There's also high frame rate video in 1080 at 100 or 120p that's automatically slowed by 4 times and encoded at 25 or 30p respectively. There's no sound in this mode. In the standard profiles, the R7 encodes video in 420 8-bit using H.264, but it also supports C-Log3 and HDR-PQ, which encode in 422 10-bit using H.265 HEVC and at slightly higher bit rates than those I quoted a moment ago. In a very welcome update, the R7 and R10 become Canon's latest cameras to dispense with the old 30-minute recording limit and will now keep recording until you essentially run out of power, memory, or if they become overheated. You can see my pre-production R7 sailing past 30 minutes here when filming in the 4K fine mode, and that is the mode that Canon told me will generate the most heat. And now approaching an hour and a half, where you'll also notice the new temperature meter helpfully indicating how close you are to the danger zone with a 10 segment scale, here currently showing 2 bars and with the camera only feeling a little bit warm. If memory and cooling aren't an issue, you can theoretically record up to 6 hours on the R7 under USB power, but under a full battery charge alone, I managed 2 hours and 21 minutes of 4K fine, with the overheating scale still only reading 4 out of 10 and power being the limiting factor here. This was over double what I managed with the R10's smaller battery. As I mentioned earlier, the EOS R7 boasts built-in sensor shift stabilization, a key benefit over the R10 and 7D Mark II, not to mention the full-frame EOS R and RP. Canon quotes up to 8 stops of compensation depending on the lens, and that it will also work alongside any optical stabilization in a lens. As a taster before my final review, here's the view through a pre-production R7 fitted with an adapted EF 50mm 1.8 STM lens, which doesn't have any optical stabilization of its own, so the view with IBIS disabled looks pretty shaky. And now with IBIS on the R7 enabled, with the view becoming much steadier and easier to compose. Remember, this is IBIS working alone here without any additional optical or digital compensation. And now for the same test, but while filming video, again with an adapted EF 50mm on the pre-production R7, first with IBIS disabled, and now with IBIS working alone. And next with additional digital stabilization that's only available in the movie mode. Which brings me to the end of part 1 of my R7 review. Once I've fully tested a final production model, I'll link to part 2 here, plus of course I have my hands-on reviews of the R10 and the 2 RFS zooms for you too. Just to wrap up though, here's a few pros and cons of the R7 compared to the 7D Mark II for anyone considering making the switch. The 7D II may be 7 years older, but still enjoys a few benefits over the R7, including a PC sync port, a top LCD information screen, built-in hardware GPS, and one of Canon's large traditional thumb wheels on the back. Some people may also prefer its greater heft and composing with an optical viewfinder. And of course, if you are using the optical viewfinder, you'll enjoy longer battery life. In the R7's favour are a smaller and lighter body, higher resolution images, faster bursts, broader focus coverage with the benefits of human, animal or vehicle detection, silent shooting options, 4K video, 1080 slow motion, a fully articulated touchscreen, USB charging and camera, focus peaking and Wi-Fi, all absent from the 7D Mark II. Now, long-term robustness is yet to be proven, but right now the R7's feature set is looking pretty good. I'd love to hear what you think of the R7 and RFS lenses, especially if you're a 7D owner who's been resisting the switch. Let me know in the comments and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on part 2 or any of my other reviews. As always, there's links in the description for the latest pricing, as well as for a cheeky coffee donation if you're feeling extra generous. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.